So welcome to week 5 of EDTECH537, blogging in the classroom. We are now officially on the second half of the course, although it might not feel like that because it's really only been the past week where you've been actually actively blogging. Everything up until that stage was more trying to get you to the point where we had everyone at a common starting point in terms of their skill with the blog. So looking ahead at this particular week, there are, like most weeks, 2 readings. The first one, Mortensen and Walker, is an interesting one because there's a couple of sections in there that I think are kind of intriguing. The first one begins, I believe it's near the bottom of page 256, where there's a discussion that goes for about 3 to 5 pages talking about this notion of the public space versus the private space and how that sort of translates within the blogging environment. The second part that I think is kind of intriguing in there, I believe, starts on about right at the bottom of page 264, where they look at this idea of, the act of writing, particularly writing on a blog, as a way of sort of thinking things through. And if you think back to some of the functions of blogs or some of the ways in which you can go about sort of, the different tasks within a blog that we were reading about last week, several of them talked about this notion of, the act of this public writing function as a way of sort of thinking ideas through. The second article is more tied to folks that may be in higher education. A lot of the nature of this course, the way it's set up, is set up primarily for a K-12 audience. This is one of the few things I try to bring in for my higher ed kinds of folks, although a lot of the types of things you'll see in there as you look through, or I guess skim through, in terms of the different ways in which you can go about blogging and the different, well, as the terms would be used last week, were functions of a blog, or tasks of a blog, or purposes of a blog, ways in which you can use a blog. Some of the things that I think, and it starts with a section on academics and blogging, if I remember correctly, that I think some of those, even though they're talking specifically about academics within higher education, I think, if you were to change the term academic to teacher, and every time you see higher education change that term to classroom, I think there's a lot of applicability once you get to that point of that particular reading. So I guess a couple of advanced organizers for you as you start to look through these. And I know one of these two is a little bit longer, actually almost twice as long as the other. Obviously, that's one that would be one like the 104-page one we had last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago now. One that you maybe want to skim through until you hit some of those more relevant points. In terms of the actual blogging this week, there are 2 entries that you're going to be working on this week. The first is a commentary entry, which essentially is you are going to comment on something. So you are going to write an entry that provides your informed opinion about something. It could be some current event, it could just be something you want to talk about, it could be something that scrolls through your Twitter stream, or that you see in one of your RSS feeds. In your RSS reader. It could be something that someone else said on one of their blog entries. Really the source of inspiration for your commentary could literally be anything. It could be something that your spouse or that your kids talked about or did that sort of you want to talk about. The second, and while it is the second one, both in terms of the way it's presented in Moodle and in terms of when it's due, it's the one that I would start working on first. In fact, I would probably start working on it prior to this week. It's a guest blog entry, and essentially a guest blog entry, it just refers to any entry on your blog that isn't written by you, because it's your blog. So anytime someone else writes an entry on it, they are a guest on your blog. Now, the only criteria that we've got for the guest blog entry is that it must be a guest that isn't in this class. So you can't get one of the other classmates to do your guest blog entry and you do a guest blog entry on their blog. I'd like you to go outside of the class to do this, but beyond that, it is entirely up to you how you go about it. So I've had in the past people who've gotten their spouse. I had one semester where they actually got one of their children to write a guest blog entry for them. because they were actually got their child to write something about their impressions of a good lesson that they had had the previous year as a part of their high school experience. I've had folks that have asked colleagues to do it. I've had folks that have just reached out to people randomly and asked them, if they would be willing, because they had this person had a blog themselves, and the student happened to be following that blog, and they contacted them sort of on a cold call to ask them if they would do that kind of thing. So who you approach is entirely up to you, and what they write about is entirely up to them. The only criteria, again, is that it has to be a guest that isn't part of this class. So that takes us, I guess, to the end of at least sort of the overview for week 5. As always, if you've got any questions, feel free to contact me. There's my email address, although you should also feel free to try to catch me on Skype or to call me if you need to. But generally speaking, email is often the best way of getting a hold of me. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of this week, in particular the guest blog entries, because those are always fun to see, who it is that you approach and what they decide to tackle as a part of their guest blog entry.